Hey guys, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about this again until I saw whether or not the last video I did on it did well. I sent Stuttering Craig kind of like a big explanation on how all this works, just because I felt like it'd be interesting to see if they talk about it on side scrollers, and if they asked me to, I would be willing to explain it myself. But as I was talking about yesterday, about like the incident with Border Patrol and Alex Pretti. If you don't know that whole situation, just watch the video yesterday. But anyways, what is really bad for the Minnesota government for it is just that, well, keep this in mind, okay? So, Alex Pretti gets into a confrontation with Border Patrol, and he's armed, and he ends up losing his life because of it. Now, this guy was part of a signal chat run by Alex Falconer, or Falconer, depending on how you want to pronounce it, who is a Minnesota state representative. And I think they're state house or something like that. I'm pretty sure. He's not a federal representative. He's a state representative. And the admin of this group is Peggy Flanagan, the lieutenant governor. All these are Democrats. And one of... there's also a fourth person who I believe is a... one of Tim Walz's political strategists, election strategists, who is also involved in this group. Now, you have these guys, and in this signal group, which is used by military, elected officials, probably law enforcement, and anyone else involved with the federal government, because it is a relatively secure and unencrypted way to talk. In this group, they share information on ICE raids and federal movements of federal agent movements. I almost said federal troop movements, but they might be doing that too soon. Now, they give license plate numbers of people that they think are ICE agents, and they'll confirm whether or not they are ICE agents. But they just share random license plate numbers saying that these guys might be ICE. We don't know for sure if they're ICE. And as I said yesterday, they use salute reports, which a salute report is a military acronym used to identify enemy combatants. Salute standing for size, activity, location, unit, time, and equipment. Now, this looks unfathomably bad for Tim Walz, because what you have here is Tim Walz's second in command, or one of his second in command, running a signal chat that has now sent an armed protester to confront federal law enforcement, and said protester got himself unalived. And in response, Tim Walz activated his own private army, essentially, the National Guard, to deal with the situation, and he is still calling for protests and resistance against Trump's Gestapo. I just want everyone to really marinate on that just for a second and realize what that actually means. Okay? This guy, if you're a conspiracy theorist, okay, and I'm not, I am not at all, But look at this from like a federal law enforcement standpoint, in which they have to investigate all this. You have the Minnesota Democratic Labor Farmer Party, which is the Minnesota's local chapter of the Democratic Party. It combined with the Farmer Labor Party, which is a like socialist party, many decades ago, and they formed one party. So it's actually two parties that still associates with the Democratic Party first and foremost. You have the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, who has now sent an armed protester to confront police. And this protester has gotten himself unalived, which has allowed the governor to activate the National Guard and take control of the situation. Now, if you're federal law enforcement, one of the things you have to look into at this point is whether or not this is a false flag operation. Because this event, sending one of their own to get unalived by federal law enforcement, has now allowed the governor to activate his military. And he is still calling for resistance against a group of individuals that are part of the federal government. They are federal employees. And he has, all he has lost is a single one of his lieutenant governor's personal weaponized protesters, who was literally carrying a weapon to physically accost federal law enforcement. I think personally that there's a very distinct reason why Tim Walz immediately caved to Trump. Now, at first, well, okay, he didn't immediately cave to Trump. And that's actually even worse, because he came out, and many of his party came out to condemn this. And now they're using this shooting as a justification to shut down the federal government, which the reason why the spending bill passed the House in the first place is because 7 Democrats voted with it, because it specifically gives funding to the DHS to make sure that every ICE agent is equipped with a body cam for the purposes of accountability. And now that the Democrats have gotten what they wanted and can put a body cam on every single ICE agent to make sure nothing illegal is going on, now one of the Democrat protesters, sent by the lieutenant governor's own chat to a border patrol cordon, which again, these guys are supposed to be protesting ICE, and yes, border patrol goes there to set up a cordon around ICE activities to prevent random civilians from wandering in. Border patrol is kinda, really not keen on having random people break their cordons. And now an ICE agent has had his finger bitten off by a protester, and according to reports, the finger was not able to be reattached. And that person is probably going to go to jail for 5 to 10 years for assault. Honestly, if you're trying to bite off people's fingers, I think at that point you're going for a little bit more than assault. That is not assault. Assault is when you threaten to hit somebody. What they actually should be going for is battery, for one, and maybe attempted murder. Because biting off someone's finger can lead to a lot of complications. I mean, that's straight up feral. Like, at this point, we have Minnesota Democrat representatives, elected representatives, apparently sending people to protest ICE and not caring that they're now sending armed protesters to these events. And these armed protesters are now attacking law enforcement. And according to Tim Walz, apparently Border Patrol and ICE agents aren't law enforcement at all. Which they are. They're allowed to arrest people, especially if you try to assault them. Well, to commit battery against them, I guess technically would be the correct term, because I already used that once before in this video. I just want to tell you, I think the reason why Alex Falconer, whichever way you want to pronounce it, came out and admitted that this group chat exists in Signal is because he realized how bad it looked. Because from a federal investigator's point of view, this is again a possible false flag operation activated by the Minnesota Democrats to give justification to activate the National Guard to potentially try to push ICE agents out of the state, which is pretty bad given that the National Guard, while controlled by the governor, can be federalized or nationalized, whichever way you want to say it, by the President of the United States and controlled directly by the President. It's not a standing militia. It is actually part of the United States military, and its hierarchy falls underneath whatever local general or colonel controls the state's National Guard. I'm pretty sure it has to be a general, but don't quote me on that. And it works alongside the Air National Guard, which is an Air Force branch of the military. Or I think the Air National Guard may also be Army. I'm not 100% sure on that, because the Army is actually the second biggest Air Force in the world, right behind the United States Air Force. If you're not aware, in terms of firepower, the top 5 Air Forces in the world is, in order from 1st to 5th, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, Russia, and then the U.S. Marine Corps, I believe. China might be in there somewhere, and the U.S. Marine Corps might be 6th at this point. It really depends. But in terms of firepower, that's the way it goes. So the Air National Guard, I think it's Air Force, but it might also be Army. It might depend on the state. And then, of course, you have the Coast Guard, which, yes, there would be Coast Guard in Minnesota. They do have some bigger rivers there, so they would be necessary. But also, they do have I think they have a connection to Lake Superior. But don't quote me on that. I actually kind of forget whether or not they have a connection to Lake Superior. I don't think they do. I think they completely surround one half of Wisconsin, which does have a connection with Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. I would have to double check that. It's been a while since I actually paid that much attention to Minnesota geography. Anyways, regardless. It looks really bad for Tim Walz, because from an outsider perspective, this is very convenient for him. I mean, it's very convenient that he is now able, without like political consequences really, to activate his National Guard unit after his second-in-command's protester, one of his second-in-command's personal protesters, got unalived by federal agents. It's not good. It's not good for a lot of reasons. Now, again, I'm not saying that there's any, like, conspiracy here. I don't think Tim Walz meant to do that. But I think why Alex Falconer came out and admitted that this group existed and that he runs this group as a community organizer and that, like, Peggy Flanagan is the admin of this group is because he realized, alongside other members of the Democrat Party, just how bad this could end for him if the federal investigators found this out and they didn't admit that this group existed beforehand. Because it looked real bad. It looked real bad. I'm repeating myself now, but I really have to stress on how bad this looks. So, in short, the Minnesota Democrat Party is using a signal chat, which is generally used by federal agents and military personnel for secure communications, and they are using a military acronym meant to identify enemy combatants to send protesters, apparently armed protesters, to go track down ICE agents. And these armed protesters have now attacked federal agents and have been unalived in the doing. Yikes. Yikes. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there, guys. I think Tim Walz realized, for that third phone call with Trump, that, maybe I should start to comply a little bit before this gets out of hand. And I'm going to leave it there, guys. Bye.